how did you guys run into the Eternals?
Who wants to go first?
Let's go alphabetically. So, Calloway.
Okay. Well, I read it the old-fashioned way. I went to my 7-Eleven and I picked up a copy when it came out. I'm the old guy. So yeah, I picked them up off the newsstand, and I remember number one very well because of that fantastic cover with the Aztecian god, and I had them all. And then before I moved to Las Vegas a couple of years ago, I just traded them in and said, well, I got to make space. And you know what? I read them. I loved them. I beat them up. So they weren't anything great. Of course, now I'm like, gee, I wish I had those. So I've acquired a few back recently. But I did read it again using my local library's Hoopla app. So I could read everything digitally. And then, but yeah, that's how I first encountered them when they came out. So I'll have a different perspective of somebody having read it the second time from the first time.
How many times have you read them?
You know what? Only twice when they first came out. And then before we had this discussion, that's it. Yeah. It's been like 40 years or so in between.
Yeah. I did not read when they came out. I didn't start reading comics until, early mid 80s. And when I started reading comics, I early on really hated the look of Kirby's art. The big barrel chests and the hands with the fingers that look like rolls of quarters, and the women that I didn't find attractive. And at that time, I was big into Frank Miller and John Byrne and stuff. And I went to college and I studied art. And so I was looking at non-representational art and expressionist art and stuff. And when I graduated from college, I got a minimum wage job next door to a comic shop and kind of found my way back to comics. And I was talking with the store owner about how much I hated Kirby, and he said, I did too. And I said, I hate it because of this. And he said, yeah, I did too. And now that's why I like it. And he said, and I said, I hate it because of this. And he said, me too. And that's why I like it now. And I started thinking in terms of my art education, hey, I enjoy all this art that isn't, more photorealistic, that kind of breaks the laws of anatomy and all this. And it made me kind of reevaluate my dislike. And once I looked at things from that new perspective, it totally changed, my love for him. And I came around full circle and came to see, that it's not about that with his art. It's about these other things, about the power and the dynamism, and you can look at a panel and it you can feel moving and just quaking within those borders. And so it was around the 90s that I really gained my appreciation. And so I've been kind of going through all his work since then, and I'm getting to the point now where it's fewer and fewer things that I'm able to read because, I'm going through the library and I'm kind of savoring as I go. And this is actually one that I didn't jump into right away. For some reason, I'm less into the sort of cosmic work, just generally, it's not my thing, the same as some other stuff. And so I coincidentally was just starting to read it, Shaw, when you reached out and said, hey, how about if we do this? And so I had to hurry and pound through it. And I did it just in time.
I feel like you guys reread it before I did. So I was the one where it's like, hey, can we do this? And then I was the one where it's like, oh yeah, I have to read it too. But and years later, you worked with Dick Ayers on one of your comics. So
yeah, through my love of Kirby, I met Dick Ayers and thought, oh, wouldn't that be exciting if I did a giant monster style comic, and if Dick Ayers would ink it. And because of you know, he's inked a lot of Kirby stuff, but I always loved those giant monsters, and he agreed to do it. And yeah, so we did about a full comic book worth of him inking my giant monsters. Yeah.
Wow. You know what? He's probably my favorite inker on Kirby. I know that's probably not a lot of people's favorite, but like you, the giant monsters, the early FF, I was like, this, he's probably my favorite. And I not to take away from anybody else, but man, are you lucky? That's fantastic.
It was a real thrill for sure.
And I have to agree with you. Those early Fantastic Four issues, first off, were my first comics, but also whenever I reread them, I love those Dick Ayers issues. And then you get to who is it, like George Bell shows up, and then by the time he gets there, you're like, can we go back to Dick Ayers? And then Coletta shows up, and then you have Thor, where it's like Coletta most of the time, and then near the end, it's Bill Everett, and you're like, I wish Bill Everett did more than like 7 issues of Kirby, you know, stories. Like those comics are amazing. But yeah, it's a lot of good stuff. I had the original issues, some of them. I started off with the Hulk ones, which no one likes. This one has a special significance for me.
You know, going back to the Eternals here, I had read Kirby's stuff with Lee in the 70s and read reprints of the 60s. So that was my impression of Kirby's work. I mean, we couldn't see really the genius behind his mind because Stan would write the dialogue. We now know that Kirby had a lot to do with plotting. So when I saw the Eternals and I read it, I had read the Mad Bomb, Captain America. And at the time, I didn't really like it. The first issue I liked because there's Icarus and it looks like it's going to be about him. And it's about all these characters. And Kirby always does that. He infuses his books with tons of characters. He's got so many ideas. And now that I went back and read it, I really liked it a lot because it's pulled out of the Marvel universe in my head now. It's just Kirby's creation versus, well, where's Spider-Man? That's not the real Hulk. You know, that was my mentality then. This isn't the Kirby that I remembered as a kid. But when I read it as an adult, and just reading his other stuff like The Demon and his other comics, now I really like it because I'm not trying to fit it into the Marvel universe.
I think that's a really great point. It hadn't crossed my mind, but that totally clicked with me, what you're saying about it, where I was kind of resistant to pull it out. And yeah, you know, there's 2 covers with the Hulk on it, and they tried to bring in, you know, just barely, they brought in Shield.
Yes.
And I was thinking about this reading them, actually, how it when those things popped up, it felt to me like editors saying, now Jack, we got to lure in some readers who are Marvel fans. And he's like, all right, I'll do it, but it won't be the real Hulk, you know, and it'll just be the Shield agents. And yeah, that's a really interesting point you make.
You guys both brought up a good point. I love the 70s stuff. You know, I love that it's a singular vision as opposed to Stan getting the words. And like the Eternals is, why are things the way they are? Or how did certain things happen? Just with Kirby Crackle sprinkled onto it.
Yeah, at the time that he wrote this, because I remember a lot of the stuff. The Chariots of the Gods was in the movie theaters a few years before. There was all the mystery around the Bermuda Triangle, and I was reading books about stuff like that. I was really into that. You know, we had that show In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy hosting it. So he drew from a lot of that stuff, and so I guess that was the appeal for that to me. So yeah, I mean, he works a lot of it in there, and his Chariots of the Gods type design in the first issue, the gods pushing the space vehicle, the chamber of in the Chamber of the Gods. It reminds me of Tumazuma from Fantastic Four, that giant totem, that design. It's really cool though.
Yeah, and it's a great double page spread as well.
Oh, I love that.
He absolutely pulled from anywhere he could think of. And you know, you imagine going through a stack of his sketches and just seeing a bizarre and amazing batch of ideas. And I get the feeling that he would even lose track of his ideas. I heard like he would pitch a story to Stan Lee, and Stan would say, "Great, draw it up," and he'd draw it up. And Stan would say, "This is fantastic, but what about the idea we discussed?" And he'd say, "Oh, what was that idea again?" And yeah, you having grown up at that time, that's another fascinating insight, that all this stuff was going on in the papers and in the tabloids and the magazines and stuff. It reminds me how when we look at it now and say, "Oh, look at how he's got this cool car and these cool clothes," and it's so charming and retro, but he was very much, you know, a man of his time, very present. And when you realize, no, these were actual automobiles and actual fashions of the times and actual hairstyles of the times and stuff, it gives you a whole new appreciation. It's sort of like if, you know, nowadays you're a musician and you say, "Oh, I want to listen to all those greats of the past and I want to emulate them." But all those great people of the past, like Jack, a great of the past, they weren't thinking of that. They were thinking, I am working in the present.
There are so many great moments that he builds on. Like you brought up the totem, and there's another splash page of these, you know, celestial drop troopers that he uses. And part of me feels like he's just making things up as he goes along. And then maybe he'll look back at a previous issue and he's like, "Okay, that's cool. Let's add that. Let's bring that back." I was wondering, at the time when you got Eternals #1, was it out of loyalty to Kirby, or were you interested in the story? Did you get what was going on?
I was really excited about Kirby's work, period. And now it's like, wow, here's a chance to be on the ground floor, issue 1. So anything he put out, Devil Dinosaur, Machine Man, 2001, I bought them because it was Kirby. And that was the main reason why, because I had friends who were like, "No, I don't like Kirby." But I was still like, "I like Kirby." So I just wanted to buy anything he put out because I had not read any of his DC work. I wasn't buying really many DC books at all. I was just a Marvel zombie, and I was buying everything Marvel, and got my allowance, and I blew it on comics. Not much different than it is today. "Honey, can I have my allowance? Thank you." And I blew it on comics. But it was Jack really that drew me to it. But I also just loved the idea of the Eternals and this tie to the chariots of the gods. And reading this book again as an adult, I went to school in college for psychology. Brilliant move on my part, and never used it. And I was looking at the deviants and the humans and the Eternals, and I'm like, wow, there's the id, the ego, and the superego right there. You know, and I didn't see it that way when I was a kid, but I don't know if Jack intended that, but I can see that.
How old were you when you first read them?
I would have been 11.
Okay. I was reading through thinking, you know, comics are made back then for what, 8 to 12-year-olds, something like that was their target audience. And I'm reading through this thinking, how would a 10-year-old react to this? You know, because Shaw, you said how, it almost feels like he's just, okay, next page, I'll draw this, and oh, this is nice. And you said, and maybe he'll come back to it. I felt like Eternals, he rarely came back if he, you know, brought something up. There were a lot of ideas packed tight in this. And I'm just trying to think, if I were 9 and I'm trying to figure my way through this, it's kind of a challenging read, I think, you know, for me as an adult. I'm kind of laughing at, oh, this will probably never come up again. And he just spent, you know, 2 sentences on it.
I mean, about the audience, you know, 8 to 12-year-olds, Kirby's covering, you know, religion, evolution, the destruction of the world. It's like, who is this book for? Like, this page alone. I don't think people give Kirby enough credit for his anti-war work. Everyone talks about how Slaughterhouse-Five is one of the great anti-war books in American culture, but almost every Kirby book with war in it is an anti-war book, and no one gives Kirby any credit for that. So, I mean, this comic is kind of a hippie comic, you know. It's like everyone, the deviants, the humans, the Eternals need to come together to unite, create peace, so the Celestials don't decide to, you know, destroy the universe, and it's like little ideas, like the whole Inca gods idea, the little drop troopers, all of those things, and then the fourth host coming for the judgment, in 4 waves. He brings those back. But one of my favorite characters, Crow, the deviant general, he shows up, he's a generic villain, and then by the end you learn about his relationship with like the daughter of the king of the Eternals, and it's like, okay, so he's just making this stuff up a little bit. Like, it's based in history, but also just Kirby being Kirby, and he has a million ideas and he has to put them down on the page.
And what a nice touch that it was just a generic villain, and all of a sudden you start seeing relationships with villains and good guys, and how they're all kind of intermixed, and maybe not so much of an evil good divide as you assume would happen in your average comic.
Like in terms of Kirby inkers, John Verpoorten inks like the first issue, and then you have Mike Royer. I was wondering if you guys have a favorite Kirby inker, especially during the 70s. Is there someone you guys like seeing work with Kirby?
Ooh. Well, I can see why. It'd probably be Mike Royer, because looking at Kirby's pencils and then seeing Mike's ink over top, I can see why he would pick him, why he wanted to work with him so much, because he stayed so true to his work. Everyone else's inks had their style layered over top. And some of them I really, really like Dick Ayers. And there was Joe Sinnott, and Coletta had his kind of almost like a feathering type style to it, like in Thor, I like that. But Royer really stuck to what Jack was trying to achieve with his artwork. And for that, I really like what he did. And he was with him, through almost everything I could think of in the 70s. Didn't he ink almost everything? But that's
pretty
my
much.
opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at the pencils, he's very true to them. So he's high on my list as well. Wally Wood did some inks with DC, and that's an interesting combination.
Challenges of the Unknown.
Yes. Yeah. Ditko inked a bunch of Kirby stuff, and that was kind of an interesting combination too. Yeah, I think probably Royer was on the top of my list. Yeah, he's had so many great inkers. It's funny, Joe Sinnott is kind of considered the crowning achievement, but for me, the way he smoothed out Kirby's roughness, I actually liked the inkers that handled things a little more crudely for the most part. What about you, Shaw?
Any of his 70s work, I just impose Royer's inks on it, just subconsciously. Wallace Woods, Dick Ayers, and Mike Royer are probably my go-to, but everyone loves Sinnott, so I feel like he's the honorable mention on everyone's Kirby inker list.
There's so much in this series, and I guess this was probably the longest one of his own that he did when you look at the books. And I felt like there were some things that were just kind of left unresolved. And this was probably intentional when the Cosmic Hulk went underground to die and just disappeared, and we didn't even see him like explode or die. He's just gone.
Yeah.
And in comes the next baddie. And maybe that was Jack's intention, like, okay, I'm done with this. Let's move on. And the ending, of course, I'm sure it came to him that the book was ending. So it just seemed to wrap up very quickly. There were no splash pages. And that was the end. And I was like, oh, there's like so much more, like what was going to be the final judgment of the Eternals? Granted, 50 years, but still, that was just kind of left there. So to me, there seemed to be a lot of things that he just wanted to do more of. And Marvel took the baton later and ran with it and did more stories of it, but not Jack's vision. And that's the shame of it.
Yeah. So the plot of the story is that the Celestials are here and they have 50 years to judge. And we don't even get to see the full 50 years, like you said. It just kind of ends. This is kind of a two-pronged question. First off, do you guys like any versions of Kirby's characters aside from Kirby's characters. Like there was a New Gods series after Kirby's New Gods. There have been Eternal series after the Eternals. And do you wish he at least would have come back and did, a final issue? Like it just takes place 50 years in the future and then you get to wrap that story up.
I have not been able to read anything that adapted what he did. I just can't do it. It's not Jack. It's just not the same. And as a kid, I probably would not have read it. To see him come back and wrap it up, if he had a chance back then to do that, absolutely. I would have loved to have seen that versus somebody else interpreting what he may have done, or taking unused art and then scripting over it. Yeah, I would definitely love to see that.
He did the Hunger Dogs when he had a chance to wrap up his New Gods Forever people story. But Christopher, I'm with you where the attraction of a lot of his creations is rarely the actual characters for me. It's more, that he's handling them. And I likewise very rarely revisit those pools beyond what he did. That said, I assume we're not including his Marvel creations with that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you guys. I don't really care for IP as much as I care for the creator. Like, the Eternals movie. The reason people care about the Eternals now is because there's a movie coming out. I haven't even seen the trailer for it. So like I'm not that curious. This is enough for me. Like Kirby's New Gods is enough for me. It feels watered down when other people do it, especially when it's like, oh, there's a movie coming out and we're gonna put out a new Eternal series, and I don't know. This is like a whole other conversation.
I'm with you on that. Sorry, I've seen the trailer and I was like, okay, just it's hard for me to look at this. I can see for just the general public going to this for the first time, it's fresh, it's new to them, they have no expectations. For a longtime fan, it's hard because there's always some expectations. And at least with the Marvel movies to date, I've been able to see things and see little Easter eggs and go, oh, that's great. And, nearly be brought to tears at times because there's things I've been reading for decades and there they are finally. But when it comes to something that Jack created, wow, that's really tough to translate that to the screen and honor his image and his vision. I will like to see the movie. I probably will see the movie. And I'm just going to have to try to keep an open mind as I can and just say this is something different because it's going to be tough.
I think it'll be interesting to see if what they keep or if they keep anything, because there's so much in there. How would you make choices like that? And so for me, that'll be the fun and the interest. If we can take this on positive light and say, hey, how can we enjoy this and get something fun out of it? For me, that'll be it. Looking for the Kirby that's in it.
I just want to see his name. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off, but no. I just want to see his name in the big letters, and then that's it. And then you can.
Yeah. Goodbye. No, but here's the thing: how are they going to take this and weave it into the Marvel universe? Because Jack never really did or had to. He didn't want to. This was like his thing, his standalone thing. So Marvel always has things connected, and they did after Jack left weave it into the universe. But I don't know. That was never the original intent.
And that's the thing, right? His 70s stuff, despite being, created with DC and Marvel, he intended to do it as his own thing. You even brought up it's not connected to anything else, and I appreciate that. I feel like anything we say negatively about the movie, people are gonna tune out. But the thing is, I dig the cast. I saw the designs, and I was like, how do they make Kirby look boring?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Great cast, but like, I just hope they stay loyal to it. Not, they don't have to adapt every single thing. Like if they don't do Unimind in the movie, that's not gonna upset me. But I don't know. I feel like this is just old head stuff where it's like, oh, you need to be loyal to the comics. I I get it. It's IP, but it's Jack's vision as well. And I feel like in some way, I kind of want to see that respected.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to poop on the movie because who am I? Right. I mean, I want to keep an open mind. They're doing their best. I'm just saying it's a high bar. It's really tough, especially for longtime fans. It's going to be, and fans of Kirby in particular, it's going to be hard. So I'm just going to try to keep an open mind and see it as something completely fresh and new.
I think the Unimind is a brilliant idea.
Yeah,
and
I like it.
I when you said that, I can't imagine them not using that. But who knows what they're going to choose, right? And thinking of the Celestials and bringing them into the Marvel universe, I think that's a force that created humankind, more or less. And with a force like that, shouldn't that be involved with whatever the next big story is going to be if they're introducing it? I wouldn't be surprised if it gets wrapped in really big time. But who knows?
This is serious in the context of Kirby's story. I hope whatever they do, they don't play it off like it's like, okay, it's the end of, like, I hope whatever they do, they dive into, like, evolution and the conflict between the Eternals and the Celestials and Deviants and everyone. I feel like if they're going to do it correctly, this is their chance to tackle some of Kirby's ideas in a way that's with gravity, as opposed to being like, oh, the villain is, dead. What happens at the teaser for the next one? Like, is Kang the Conqueror the next whatever?
Mm-hmm.
You keep showing these great splash pages, and I wanted to say one of the things I just loved about this, and Kirby was starting to do it, at this point, is you start the book with a splash page, and you turn the page and you have a 2-page splash page, and it just gets grander and grander as you go, and the subject matter of these humongous beings, and their humongous hand for a 2-page spread, or that one you showed just towering over, the landscape, I just thought was awe-inspiring and sublime.
I agree. Yeah. Some of the issues he'll have, like the opening page, the splash page, the double page, and then another splash page. And he uses them to great effect, either to show size, scale, or just shock on someone's face, a close up. But none of it's wasted. He's not just like throwing in pinups. There's so much packed in there. You can just stare at that page for a while to take everything in. So I've rarely seen someone do that, where they put in a lot of splash pages, but they're not just trying to fill in the page rate, knock it out. It's really, there's a lot there, and it does not destroy the pacing in any way. It's fantastic.
Like that said,
no, please go ahead.
I was going to say, for my first time reading experience, I'm going through, and I think some of these earlier issues you mentioned, as it got later, he had to pack more story and to tidy up the storyline, and you didn't see as much of it. But some of the early ones, there might have been like 5, 6, 7 splash pages per issue, and these issues I noticed were only 17 pages long each. They're actually short issues. And one thing that was tough for me, and I think I need to reread it, and now that I know, okay, this is story and it's going to go from here to here, so I can go through it again and try and understand, how this is all together. But first time reading for me, it felt like a lot of exposition of, here's the gods and the Eternals and the Deviants, and not a lot happening, in Kirby sense. And it wasn't until we got to that Hulk issue that we actually started seeing, okay, here's some Kirby action. And back to what I said about, how did kids react to this? When I was a kid, if there was only 1 page of action in a comic, that wasn't a good comic. I wanted 5 pages of people punching each other. And in this Eternals run, you've got the first 6 or 8 issues or whatever, and very little punching people out. And so again, what do kids think of this? It is really fascinating for adults, all these crazy ideas, and it's kind of fun to try to say, okay, we've lived this history, And here's my attempt to explain how all of these things we hear about are related in this grand design of things. But do kids have interest in that? I don't know.
I mean, as a kid, I'm sorry, I was just going to say,
ahead.
As a kid, I did have a hard time following it, even though I liked Jack's work. But that back then I was reading it a month at a time. And in between that, I'm reading all this, fighting superhero stuff. And that was very different from what Jack was doing at this point. So sitting and reading it continuously as a graphic novel, it makes a lot more sense to me. And I enjoyed it a lot more. Of course, I mean, this is many years later, but it works better that way.
Yeah, it's great to hear the insights of someone who read it as it came out. I think we're 3 generations, right? Because Shaw, you're behind me.
Yeah. I mean, all of those things you brought up, like, I gave the Hulk issue flack before we started, but those were when you're younger and you see Jack Kirby drawing the Hulk, you're like, oh, this is cool. Now I love the history aspect, and the mythology aspect. Like, here's another splash page. He introduces Cersei, which he spells it differently at first. He ends it with S-Y and not S-I. You learn that it's the Cersei from Greek mythology, and, turns out Toshiro Mifune's an Eternal. He's an actual immortal samurai who just acts in movies on the side. Like, Icarus was there during Noah's Ark. He brings historical and biblical and mythological together, and that's what I love so much about it. I don't think he gets enough credit. Like, the Eternals, like, what are these? These are like coffee mugs on giant robots, but it's the coolest thing ever.
It is.
And the jetpack guys are there too. Like, these are the statues, the Incan statues you see at the beginning, and he brings them back. It's amazing.
That picture of Cersei, the reveal of Cersei, the full page splash, I was really fascinated by that because I was looking at her musculature in that pose and thinking, this does not follow standard Kirby anatomy in my mind. And it got me thinking, I wonder if he used some photo reference for this of like some ballet dancers or something. And I actually posted it online just to see if anyone had any information. No one was able to hunt it down. But if you look, like, the curve of her legs and stuff, I thought this looks to me like a drawing done by someone who's looking at an actual human being. Whereas, so much of Kirby, it's this sort of abbreviated shorthand for a human being that creates that Kirby look and feel. And I was actually, just little things like that were really fascinating to me flipping through.
So one of my favorite things, like, early on, Kirby introduces the fear of the devil. And I know Kirby was religious, you would see him do his, like, portrait of God. I'm not religious, but I love the fact that he uses, that fear of the devil. Like, Crow's like, I'm going to make the humans destroy themselves. And then he makes himself grow horns and he does his alien invasion of, I love little things like that, where he mixes the religion and mythology and history together in this one thing that's clearly not made for, like, 8 to 12-year-olds, like we've been mentioning.
Yeah. And it's still so relevant because you think, oh, look at all those people just falling for this guy pretending to be a demon or the devil. How gullible are they? Well, look around. I mean, people are gullible all the time. Look what they fall for. So he's got something there. People can be played en masse.
I wrote a comic book story 10 years ago about people being by the media they hear. And a friend brought it up to me, and I actually have recently started working on it as my next project. And a friend said to me, so what's your next project? You told me about this project 10 years ago. And I thought, I don't know, that seems kind of stupid. It's so unlikely. And then he said, but now I realize, no, you're absolutely right. And it's true. Things are cyclical, these fears. And if you know your history, it all comes back again. You'd think we'd learn. As a society, we kind of don't.
No. No, we don't. Even you look at comics with speculation back in the 90s, and I feel like speculation's coming back around again with movies and slabbed books. We never learn. There's no easy buck. There's no making a killing. It's going to be very few people that make that killing. They're at the top of the pyramid. The ones at the bottom, sorry, too late. You missed your window.
Yeah, the people that made a fortune during the gold rush were the people that sold shovels.
Yeah. You mentioned the drawing of Cersei, and one thing that struck me about this series as I read it is that unlike the older books that Stan was scripting, where Sue Storm would kind of just like take a back seat,
yep,
and then the three guys would resolve the situation. Twice in this book, in particular, in the Eternals, the women have the cooler head, and they use their wits to defeat the villain versus just brute strength. In the annual, it was Thena who waited out the time when they were battling this one creation, or this one creature from, I guess, maybe the future or something. That time just ran out, because otherwise he would have destroyed them. And then it was Cersei when they were battling underground. That one, I forget the guy's name. I wrote notes, but I can't even read them now.
The mind killer, or
the mind,
yeah,
like the guy. Then band-aids wrapped up, and there was a helmet they were trying to put on him to keep him under control. Dromedon.
Yeah. That was after the Hulk issue you guys mentioned.
Yes.
Like, that was, which I love that character way more than Robot Hulk. Like, he has some great dialogue. He's like, I'll make you weep like children before I give you release. And you're like, that's dark.
Well, I mean, they're like, Cersei, get out of here, run, save yourself. And she's like, no. And she has a plan. Yeah. So twice the ladies step up and use their brains to defeat the villains. That was very insightful. Okay.
Yeah, and Jack always had strong women. Like, if you notice in Fantastic Four, Sue Storm saves the day in the artwork, but then Stan will like make Reed Richards say something. Like, sometimes Stan's dialogue is borderline misogynistic, if not explicitly misogynistic. And there are so many moments where she'll like
Fantastic Four in particular. Yeah. Woman.
And then you look at, and like, she'll uppercut Doctor Doom and save the day. And then Stan has the audacity to say, like, the boys are hanging out, Sue. Go, like, what does that mean?
Or you mustn't exert yourself, Sue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you have New Gods, where it's like there's Darkseid, the most evil character in the universe, and who is his like military made up of? It's like all women. It's all female Furies. It's like you can clearly see who is having the inspiration and who is just kind of like,
And in the Eternals here, archaeologist's daughter, Margot, I thought that was an interesting plot device to have her brought along by the Eternals, because she's our entranceway into this world, the one who doesn't know or understand, who's brought along, and that gives the characters a device to share what's going on. It seems to me like she had some decent stuff to do, throughout the various journeys here as well.
Mm-hmm. And Kirby always had those great, well, not all of them, some of them are corny, but he has those human characters. Like, you have the gods, and then you have, there's Margot and that college professor, Sam Holden, who Cersei kind of attaches herself to him. Like, they make kind of a strange pair, but I love that. Like, they have, Cersei and Sam Holden, Icarus and Margot, and then my two favorite characters in the whole series, the Reject and Carcass, who are, they're both killing machines. They're both deviants, but like Carcass, who looks like a giant carrot with a face and legs, he's like a poet and a philosopher. And the Reject looks like, like statuesque, and he has a flowing mane, but he's a monster on the inside. Like, he's a killer. I love that, that juxtaposition that Kirby uses.
The annual that actually focuses on them, the one thing about that is that back then, annuals meant something in terms of weaving into the ongoing storyline, because I would see that in the Avengers, I would see that in the Defenders, and Jack would do that with his stuff. He would then there's the annual, and it's almost a standalone story in a way that it wraps up the whole, all the plot and everything in it. And Jack had so much fun with that because he's got Jack the Ripper in there, Attila the Hun, so you can play with all these toys, and you've got characters in disguise that occasionally drop that disguise and freak people out. But it's part of the overall story versus tied into other things. And once again, he's not tied into anything else like you'll often see in annuals today. And even today, annuals, geez, I can't even keep track of what annuals what. Like back then it was annual 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's always annual number 1.
Yeah.
Just a different year. So back then, to me, it was actually exciting to see an annual come out. And it wasn't 3 stories packed in there. It was one story done by the same artist and writer. And that was it. So to me, it was more of an event. And even that issue to me was an event.
It's gimmicky now a little bit where it's
it
just
is.
Like, oh, we'll do. There was one that came out. It was like a round robin where they get 20. I don't even know what round robin means. And they get 20 people to do like one. It's a mess. Like,
yeah.
This Eternals annual this is just Jack telling his story.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. You know,
an extra story for the year that's twice as big as all the other regular stories of the year.
No problem for Jack.
It's a bonus. Yeah, it's a total gift.
Working at his drawing table, just like, oh boy, more pages, you know?
Right?
But, you know, the whole idea, like, it does sound hippie-ish, you know, it's about world peace. They have to work together to save the Eternals. And at some point they bring in the Russians, you know. The Russians are kind of partially the antagonists also. Like there are Eternals who live in Russia, but they are kind of like there's Druig, you know, Icarus's cousin, who's a sociopath. And I love that, where it's like they're not all, you know, benevolent and godly. Mm-hmm. Like one of them is a KGB spy who tortures people and causes wars behind the scenes. And it's really, again, on top of all the stuff we listed earlier, he, you know, puts like military intrigue and, you know, espionage in there.
And like we were saying earlier, it's not so black and white, because that's an Eternal who we would define as evil. And then like you said about the deviants, you've got this beautiful one that's pretty evil, but you've also got this big scary looking one that is I would say a good guy.
Is there anything you guys want to throw out there? Anything you think we left out? I feel like we left a lot out. Like people do not understand how dense this book is because we're the only 3 people on the planet who have read it, apparently. So,
well, the only other thing that struck me was, you know, here was Icarus grabbing Margot and getting her out of the temple before the Celestial locks it down for 50 years. Because, you know, she'll grow old in there, but yet Dr. Damien, he's going to grow old and die in there, you know, but that's his choice. But it's like, don't you kind of worry about him? Just like, this is it. This is his retirement right here.
What do they eat? You know, like,
that was just like, whatever. Leave the old guy there.
It's even dark too, because you see her screaming for her father. And it's like, you know, I was not going to bring up something as serious as that. Like, I'm looking at the Rock'em Sock'em Robots page.
Yes. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, Rock'em Sock'em. Mm-hmm.
It's not only like a precursor to video games. It's just a reference to this children's toy. Like, the first time you meet the Queen and like Princess of the Eternals, they're playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and it's great because they're like, we're in the middle of a serious meeting, and New York is being blown up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good point.
Locking her father into the tomb reminds me of early in COVID. People say, oh, well, it's just the elderly who are dying from COVID anyways. So, you know, what's the big deal? And it's the same here, right? Well, he's elderly. So what's the big deal if he's locked in there for 50 years? He won't even last 50 years.
There's a scene where he's like asleep and Ajax like, it's okay. Humans are fragile. Take your nap. You know, it's kind of sad. Speaking of Ajax, he does by far have my favorite design.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I love that.
If you were an artist, I don't think you want to draw any of these designs because they're so complex, you know. So Shaw, I just want to thank you so much for thinking of me to do this with you. It was a lot of fun to read the comics and to talk to you about them. And Christopher, it's nice to meet you. Hopefully
nice to meet you
on the scene
yes.
as things open up. We'll have to see if we wind up at any cons together.
Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, no, thanks so much for coming on, rambling about Kirby. And I don't know, you guys have an open invite if you want to talk about like Captain Victory or something, which is an equally strange book.
I have to dig more into that. I have a few of those, but I like the opportunity to discuss and go in and discover again and read it, because that's one I didn't read when I was a kid. So now, hey, no expectations, no looking back, just kind of my impressions. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed going back and reading the books too, and having a chance to discuss it with you guys. And I really appreciate the time that we've taken together.